My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and in this video I want to talk about another aspect of Tolkien's imagination, which is one of the things that draws many of us to his works. He's known primarily for inventing kind of a world with a bunch of creatures and even languages, but in this particular video I want to talk about one very small aspect of his world that he created, and that's Mithril, the metal that looks like silver, can be as hard as steel. And I want to talk about kind of its history, the meaning of the word, and its uses in the published writings. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we can learn about Mithril. So Mithril is only one name for the metal that we know of as Mithril. Mithril is the Elvish name for it, and it's made up of two components. Mith, meaning gray or silver, and we see that in names like Mithrandir, which of course is the Grey Pilgrim, Gandalf's Elvish name. And then Ril basically means glittering or shining or something to that effect. And so basically the name means shining silver or shining gray, glittering gray. And probably the real element is also what we see in the name of Andúril, which is Aragorn's reforged sword forged from the shards of Narsil. Because there, that's the flame of the west, and Andu being the west, Ril, you get that same idea of something that's shining or glittering, and that would be akin to flame. So that's probably the same root word there as well. But at any rate, Mithril means glittering gray, basically. So it's called that because it looks like silver. It's a grayish metal, and the other names for it are true silver, and the dwarves also have their own secret name for it, which makes sense. Most everything about the Dwarven language is secret relative to everybody else. Almost nobody ever learned the Dwarvish languages. And the other name for it is Moria silver. And the reason for that is, in the movies we hear Gandalf say that the wealth of Moria was not in gold or jewels, but in Mithril. But more technically, and he says this in the novel, it's the only place in Middle-earth where Mithril was actually found. So it's called Moria silver for the simple reason that it's silver that is found only in Moria. Now there is a small caveat to that. In the Unfinished Tales there is a text dealing with the kings of Númenor and some of that indicates that there was actually some amount of Mithril found on the island of Númenor. That contradicts Gandalf's statement in the Lord of the Rings, so this again kind of shows Tolkien's habit of developing his ideas over time in ways that aren't completely compatible with each other, because he never really settles on a final version of much of anything. But it is interesting to note. Now, it is possible, I suppose, to construe Gandalf's words as basically saying that for all intents and purposes it's only found in Moria because by the Third Age Númenor has sunk, there's no way to mine any more Mithril out of there, so Moria is basically the only place left. So Mithril is, because of this, very rare, very hard to come by. Even before Moria was taken over by orcs and the Balrog, it was worth 10 times its weight in gold, according to what is said in the Lord of the Rings. So it's already a very rare, very expensive, very precious metal. And after that, it becomes basically priceless. I mean, if you could get your hands on Mithril, it would be, something of great value. As Gandalf says, and again, his wording is slightly different in the novel. In the novel, he actually says the Mithril coat that Thorin gave to Bilbo was actually worth more than the Shire and everything in it, not just the Shire. So, true, there's not a whole lot of things that are of great value in the Shire in and of themselves for the most part, but there's a lot of stuff in the Shire, so it's still a very valuable artifact. Now, the interesting thing about that I want to talk about is, why is there a Mithril coat in, Erebor, the Lonely Mountain? Well, the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain were, of course, dwarves from Moria. They're basically the refugees and survivors who managed to escape Moria after the Balrog and the orcs took that over. So it makes sense that they would have Mithril items among their possessions and take them to Erebor, and so that's where Thorin ends up finding the Mithril coat that he gives to Bilbo. It's just one of those things. And of course the huge value of it gives a little greater impact to that gift, because basically Thorin is telling Bilbo, I value your friendship so highly, I'm going to give you this thing that we basically can't make any more of, and people would kill to get. So that's pretty important. As far as a few general characteristics of the metal itself, the metal, it, of course, looks like silver, hence its name. And it's malleable like silver, and it's also lightweight, which is unusual. The other thing about it, though, that makes it better than silver is that it doesn't tarnish, doesn't rust, doesn't do anything like that. It stays, the same basically forever. Now, one of the misconceptions we have about mithril is that it's hard, like, steel. But in fact, what Gandalf says is that the dwarves can make of it a metal that is as hard as steel, not that it is as hard as steel. So, technically speaking, when we see mithril in the form of, the mithril coat that Bilbo gives to Frodo, or that he got from Thorin, we're seeing an alloy mithril mixed with something else. What that something else is, we don't know, and because Gandalf says that dwarves could make of it a metal that is hard as steel, it makes you think that this secret was known really only to the dwarves, and that the elves don't really know how that process works or how to replicate it. Although the elves did use mithril, because being enamored of anything that reminds them of the stars and moon, they very much highly prized silver, and especially mithril, because of its unique qualities. So anyway, like I said, by itself, mithril is not that hard. Like I said earlier, it's actually quite malleable, easy to form into different shapes. So there's a lot of things about mithril that we kind of think we know, but don't really know when we get right down to it. So those are the general characteristics of mithril. Now let's look at some actual artifacts made with mithril that we know of from Tolkien's writings. So, of course, in terms of things made with mithril in Tolkien's universe, we've already mentioned the mithril mail given by Thorin to Bilbo and then by Bilbo to Frodo. And we never get an explicit statement of this, but because of the things that happen with this vest, we do get the idea that mithril mail is actually harder than steel, because it basically stops everything. When Frodo gets attacked in the mines of Moria, he basically suffers just a bruise. And then later on in the novel, this isn't in the movie, but in the Scouring of the Shire, in the novel, Saruman actually tries to stab Frodo with a knife as well, and the knife snaps on the mail. Now, I don't know how, most people probably aren't familiar with how exactly mail works in the real world with just regular steel, but regular mail can be broken, pierced, or whatever, and it's not going to stop just everything. It's good for stopping a lot of things, but it won't stop everything. So there's some implication there that mithril mail is actually harder than, normal chainmail. Beyond the mithril mail, we also have, again associated with Moria, the runes on the Moria door that show up under starlight and moonlight. This is from a metal that the elves developed called Ithildine, which basically means star moon, and the reason, of course, being that it only appears under the light of starlight and moonlight. So that particular metal only reveals itself under those conditions. So, and again, that makes sense, because elves, again, they like, anything that reminds them of stars and moon, which makes sense. The elves, their own name for themselves is the Eldar, and that's basically the star people. So that makes sense. There's also a hint there. It's nowhere really stated that I know of, but there's a hint there in that Moria door that maybe the same thing is true of the moon letters in the map in The Hobbit that Thorin and company take to Elrond to read. Perhaps those moon letters are moon letters because they are written with Ithildine. It's never stated anywhere, and it's, the moon letters are actually said to correspond specifically to the moon that was present when the thing was written, so it's not clear that that's the case, but it's, it's possible. Other things that were made with mithril, we don't really know of any weapons made with mithril, and that's probably because, to the extent that anything was made for war purposes, it was the hardness that was valued. There's no particular indication that sharpness is a particularly strong element, so we don't know really of any weapons made with mithril. So, oddly enough, you get a lot of RPGs and things like that, in modern times that are based at least somewhat on Tolkien's works, and there's mithril weapons all over the place. Oddly enough, that has no precedent in the Lord of the Rings. Other things, though, that are made from mithril, the ring Ninya, the ring that Galadriel bears, that the stone is adamant. The band is actually mithril. It looks just like silver, but that's because mithril looks like silver, and it's never said really in the movies that it's made from that, and I'm not even sure it's in the novel. It might be in the appendices, but somewhere for sure it does say that Ninya is made of mithril. And so that's another thing that's, that gives you some idea too of just how valuable it was considered, because one of the 3 greatest rings is made of mithril. And again, that makes sense as well, because Celebrimbor, who made the elven rings, he had a great friendship with the dwarves of Moria, so he would have had access to mithril at the time. Other things made with mithril, you've got the Elendilmir, which is basically, it was a jewel that belonged to Elendil. It was basically like a circlet. It was what he wore instead of a crown when he was king in Arnor. And there's not a whole lot about the Elendilmir written. It does say that, and I don't remember if this is in the Unfinished Tales or the appendices, but Aragorn, after he takes up the kingship, he has Gimli help him search the Tower of Orthanc, and they find the Elendilmir there, which tells you that Saruman has been hoarding things that didn't belong to him for a long time. But it was made of mithril, and it's in connection with that we get a statement about Numenor having some mithril, because the Elendilmir would have come from Numenor with Elendil when he escaped the drowning of Numenor. You also have a few other things made with mithril. When Gandalf and Pippin arrive at Minas Tirith, they note that the guards who are watching the White Tree, who are the most kind of, they're not necessarily the best warriors, but it's kind of the highest ceremonial position, at least, that you can get. They're wearing helmets made of mithril, because that's just kind of like it has to do with their station. They're considered that important that they're going to get helmets made of mithril. And again, you have to remember, mithril, you can't even get it anywhere. You can't find it. To get anything made out of mithril, you'd have to melt down something that's already been made. So that's a pretty good indication of how important their job was considered. Also, in the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, we learn that after Aragorn took up his rule, he had Gimli bring dwarves from Erebor to rebuild the gates of Minas Tirith that were broken by the great battering ram Grond. And it says that they actually make the gates out of mithril, which that really tells you something, because there's not going to be a very small amount of mithril. That's going to be a lot of mithril that they're going to have to use for it to be of any value. And it also tells you how important they considered to have those gates stand up the next time they had to have a actual siege. But it's interesting too, because it does show that, the new kingship that Aragorn is taking up was considered that important by the dwarves that they were willing to give up probably a large amount of a metal that they were probably never going to get more of, to basically have as a gesture of this is how important we think your kingship is. So that's a pretty big deal too. So that's pretty much everything that's made of mithril that we get explicit references to in Tolkien's writings. Actually, I did forget one more thing, and it's partially because this never comes up in the movie, and it gets only really a brief reference in the novel itself. In the novel, when Aragorn comes with the ships for the Corsairs up the river to save Gondor from the siege, in the movie we just kind of get a really quick, he jumps off the boat and he's in the battle. In the novel, in fact, what happens is people from Gondor actually see the ships coming, and they think to themselves, well, we thought we were in a decent place, but now we're doomed. But then he raises his banner, and the banner never comes up in the novel either, in the movie either, because of the way they changed the story. But his banner is that of the old kings of Gondor, which is basically the white tree, 7 stars, and then a crown. And it says that the crown, in fact, is woven of gold and mithril. So there's a little bit of mithril there as well. It's not, a typical thing that you would find with mithril, but, again, that kind of shows how malleable the substance was, that you could actually make a thread out of it. So I just wanted to bring that up to wrap up all the things that are made with mithril. So that is pretty much all there is to know about mithril in Tolkien's universe. at least that I can think of. There's not a whole lot more out there. There's, you have to pull this together from a few different sources, but most of it's in the Lord of the Rings and Unfinished Tales. And there's, there may be some scattered references somewhere in the, other later versions of the history of Middle-earth works that Christopher Tolkien put out, but I haven't run across them recently, so I don't remember if there are. But that's pretty much all you need to know about Mithril. It's an interesting substance. It's, again, another one of those elements of Tolkien's imagination that keeps us coming back to his world. So if you enjoyed that video, please do give it a thumbs up. Please share it around. If you'd like to learn more about Tolkien and the worlds he created and things about Tolkien that aren't related to Middle-earth even, please subscribe to the channel, and you can also follow me at JRRTLore on Twitter. So until next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namaste.